Humanitarian aid provided by the Pan-American Health Organization, the United Nations Trust Fund for COVID-19, UNICEF, the World Health Organization and Russia arrived in Venezuela this Wednesday. The number of COVID-19 cases and fatalities across the world continues to rise, with almost 1.5 million people having been infected by the novel coronavirus. The United States has now reported over 400,000 cases of COVID-19. Meanwhile, alarming figures show that the novel coronavirus is killing African Americans at a higher rate than the US population at large. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro thanked the People's Republic of China for the constant humanitarian aid that is being provided to support the fight against the novel coronavirus.
We in Venezuela have received 3 aircraft from China through the air bridge that we have established for humanitarian aid and support from China. China is supporting more than 120 countries around the world with medical supplies and material support. The first Latin American and Caribbean country that China sent medical and scientific experts to was Venezuela. They arrived 1 week ago. They have shared the warmth of Venezuela and have offered us their scientific knowledge, their smiles, their love, their solidarity. From here, I want to thank President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China, our friend, for all the support he has organized for our homeland, our people.
Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez expressed gratitude for the humanitarian aid provided by Russia, the UN, the WHO, PAHO, and Russia to combat the COVID-19 outbreak.
I wanted, on behalf of the President Nicolás Maduro, to express our deep thanks to the United Nations system, to its Secretary General, to the Director of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom. I want to thank the coordinator of the United Nations system in Venezuela, Peter Grossman. I also want to thank the Russian Federation, its ambassador in Venezuela, our friend Sergio, as we call him, Sergei. Welcome. As soon as he arrived in Venezuela, he became very active in our bilateral relations, in our bilateral cooperation. Today we have received 20,000 kits of PCR tests from the Russian Federation. As you will know, one of the highlights in this fight against the pandemic, in addition to the collective and social quarantine that is being complied with in Venezuela, is also the process of mass screening through PCR and rapid tests.
The first flight from China with medical supplies to combat the COVID-19 virus arrived in Mexico City on Tuesday night. The plane landed in Mexico after leaving Shanghai, where it was loaded with protective gear for medical personnel, ventilators, medicines and other supplies. The Undersecretary of Prevention and Health Promotion, Hugo Lopez-Gatell, explained that the shipment will allow to cover 100% of the needs that hospitals currently have. According to the latest figures from the Mexican authorities, the country has seen 2,785 COVID-19 cases and 141 fatalities. Cuban authorities announced on Tuesday that the country has entered the limited local transmission stage of the COVID-19 epidemic. This Wednesday, 61 new cases of COVID-19 were confirmed for a total of 457, according to Minister of Public Health José Bordal. Also reported was 1 new fatality, bringing the death toll to 12. Over 1,700 patients are hospitalized and under observation, while another 9,000 are being monitored in their homes. The Chilean Ministry of Health reported 430 positive COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours, as well as 5 deaths. The latest figures bring the death toll in Chile to 48 and the number of cases to 5,546. Meanwhile, Brazil remains the worst affected country in the region, with a total of 14,152 COVID-19 cases and 699 deaths so far. Ecuador comes next with some 4,000 cases and at least 220 deaths. Peru has reported over 2,954 cases and 107 fatalities. Mexico has reported 2,800 confirmed cases and 141 deaths. According to Johns Hopkins University, these countries are followed by Panama and Argentina with 2,249 cases and 1,715 cases respectively. Both countries have reported more than 60 deaths. Dr. Carissa Etienne, director of the Pan American Health Organization, called for all governments in the region to adopt measures to curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus and ensure the production of vital medical supplies.
A pandemic like COVID-19 would overwhelm any health system, but its impact on those without sufficient health workers will be devastating. Today is World Health Day, a time to acknowledge and celebrate doctors, nurses, midwives, and many other people working to keep our communities healthy.
As the coronavirus health crisis continues in Ecuador, citizens have stressed that the authorities are still failing to pick up the bodies of those who have died in their own homes. Meanwhile, officials have announced that around 40% of health workers have tested positive for COVID-19. More details in the following report.
The streets of Guayaquil are the site of numerous heart-wrenching stories. Tales of those who have been left to die after the collapse of the city's health system and whose bodies are abandoned by authorities.
This is my mother's house. We're here because we can no longer stand the smell of the body. Nobody is helping us. Nobody has come to pick up my grandfather's body. I don't know where to go to find help. Where is the government when we need them?
Campesinos in Guayas province have started to organize for the possibility of a food shortage.
Providers are saying they don't want to go to Guayas anymore out of fear of getting infected. That is why the Campesino movement in Guayas has set up special brigades to pick up product that was discarded on the fields because we cannot let anything go to waste now.
Recently, due to political disagreements, the National Assembly blocked the approval of a new health code. For lawmaker Ángel Sin Maleza, one of the main mistakes made by this administration was laying off hundreds of doctors.
The
layoffs started last year, and authorities were warned that this was a mistake, especially getting rid of people in the epidemiology department and those in the research institute. We had asked the previous health minister to talk to the government to put a stop to the layoffs. Now we're all paying for those mistakes.
On the top of this, authorities announced that around 40% of health workers have been infected by COVID-19.
We have over 1,600 cases of health workers who have tested positive for the novel coronavirus. This is worrying because they have to go under quarantine before going back to work.
Authorities have provided citizens with new ways to ask for the removal of the victims' bodies, but people say that these are not working. Guayaquil's City Council announced they would donate over 1,000 cardboard coffins for the deceased.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The United States reported almost 2,000 COVID-19 fatalities on Tuesday, the highest number in a single day. The latest figure of 1,997 fatalities brought the death toll to over 14,000 on Wednesday morning. The US has reported over 400,000 positive COVID-19 cases, representing more cases than the sum of all those reported in Spain, Italy and China. New York State continues to be the epicenter of the outbreak, reporting 805 deaths on Tuesday alone. The state, with a population of nearly 20 million, has now more confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus than Italy, a nation of 60 million that was the first in Europe to be hit by the disease. Meanwhile, the total number of fatalities in New York City surged to 4,009. However, so far the death toll does not include people who have died in their own homes, so it could be much higher. Meanwhile, alarming figures show that the novel coronavirus is killing African Americans at a higher rate than the US population at large, according to preliminary numbers from Louisiana, Michigan and Illinois, that officials say point to inequalities in healthcare access. Louisiana Governor John Edwards said more than 70% of the 512 people killed by the coronavirus in the state as of Monday were Black Americans. The figure represents a high percentage in a state where African Americans represent about 33% of the entire population. Meanwhile, the mayor of Chicago announced that African Americans account for more than half of those who have tested positive and 72% of virus-related fatalities in the city, even though they make up a little less than a third of the population. Russia continues to help the international community in the midst of the novel coronavirus pandemic, having sent test kits to 30 nations, among other medical supplies. During a meeting of the Coordination Council responsible for combating the spread of the COVID-19 virus, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin recalled that Moscow had donated medical supplies to several European Union member states and nations of the Commonwealth of Independent States, as well as Latin American countries such as Venezuela and Cuba, in order to support the global efforts against the pandemic. Meanwhile, Russia has now reported over 8,600 cases of COVID-19 in 81 out of 85 of its regions. The death toll has reached 63, while 580 people have recovered from the virus, according to Russia's Coronavirus Response Center. Moscow, the worst-hit part of the country, confirmed 660 new cases in the last 24 hours, taking the total number of cases in the Russian capital to 5,800. All Russians, except for those working in essential institutions and establishments, are on paid leave until April 30th as part of national efforts to contain the spread of the coronavirus. Russia's Consumer Rights and Human Wellbeing Watchdog reported that its regional epidemic control centres had received test kits and more than 900,000 laboratory tests had been conducted already. While British Prime Minister Boris Johnson spent a second night in intensive care, hospitals across the United Kingdom reported 938 COVID-19 deaths in a single day. Leading disease data analysts have predicted that the UK will become the country worst hit by the coronavirus pandemic in Europe, accounting for more than 40% of total deaths across the continent. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle predicts 66,000 COVID-19 fatalities in the UK by August, with a peak of nearly 3,000 a day based on a steep climb in daily deaths early in the outbreak. The analysts also claim discussions over herd immunity led to a delay in the government introducing physical distancing measures, which were imposed from March 23rd, when the average daily death toll was 54. The UK has reported over 60,000 COVID-19 cases, while the death toll surpasses 7,000. According to the Robert Koch Institute, Germany has reported over 100,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases. The number of deaths increased to over 1,800, while the measures imposed were described as having a positive effect, with a promising downward trend in the spread of the virus reported. The number of new cases per day, as well as the basic reproduction number, which indicates how many people are infected by one person, are important indicators in evaluating the situation, according to the Institute. The basic reproduction number in Germany is currently 1.3, although there were some fluctuations. And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. The Chinese city of Wuhan lifted its 11-week lockdown this Wednesday, easing outbound rail, road and ferry travel after all terminals were sprayed with disinfectant. Our correspondent Ramsey Parasa brings us the details.
Greetings, colleagues. The city of Wuhan, epicenter of the novel coronavirus in China, saw its first day of semi-normality after 76 days of a strict quarantine that was lifted today and allowed for the reestablishment of train and airport services, as well as the reopening of the city highways. It also allowed, for the first time since January 23rd, for thousands of people to leave the city. Thousands of people who, by the way, had been stranded there since January 23rd, when the Chinese authorities completely closed off the city in order to stop the spread of the novel coronavirus. According to the authorities of the China Railway Group, this Wednesday, more than 55,000 people were expected to leave Wuhan by train, and for that purpose, more than 80 bullet trains were put into operation. Also, to fulfill that aim, control over highways was reinforced in order to guarantee the transportation of the people by these means. The authorities have established around 75 checkpoints around the city to guarantee orderly transport, as a large number of vehicles were expected to be on the streets, and that was exactly what happened. The Wuhan International Airport resumed its operations. The first flights since January were reported, and according to the airport authorities, more than 200 flights in and out of Wuhan were expected during the day today, Wednesday. We should know that the lifting of the quarantine in Wuhan does not mean that the restrictions and the prevention measures are eliminated in the city. The authorities of the central province of Hubei will maintain the maximum state of health emergency in the whole province, and especially in Wuhan, and urged citizens to not go out unnecessarily. Also, all of China remains on alert to avoid a spike in new coronavirus cases. Let's recall that China reported 62 new cases today, 59 of them imported, in addition to 2 deaths. But we cannot fail to mention that the reopening of Wuhan is sending a hopeful message to all nations that are fighting to contain the spread of the novel coronavirus right now. This is all the information we have for now, but we will continue to keep our viewers updated on the situation.
Meanwhile, China's Jack Ma and Alibaba foundations have made a second round of donations to support Africa in the fight against COVID-19. The donation of medical supplies is destined for all 54 countries in Africa as the continent grapples with the rise in the number of people infected with the virus. Included in the donations are 500 ventilators, 200,000 protective suits and face shields, 2,000 thermometers, 1 million swabs and extraction kits, and 500,000 gloves, according to a statement by the foundations, which are also facilitating contacts between African medical professionals and Chinese doctors to exchange experiences in the treatment and prevention of COVID-19. Africa has reported over 10,000 confirmed coronavirus cases, according to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared a state of emergency to combat the coronavirus pandemic on Wednesday. The move that gives the Council of Ministers all necessary power to protect the country's peace and sovereignty. Ethiopia, Africa's second most populous nation, with more than 110 million inhabitants, has reported 52 cases of COVID-19 and 2 deaths. Authorities have already taken a series of measures to stem the spread of the virus, including closing schools, banning public gatherings, and requiring most employees to work from home. The Prime Minister did not mention what additional steps would be taken under the state of emergency.
Bans on public gatherings and work-from-home directives for most employees. Africa's second most populous nation has recorded.
As new cases of the novel coronavirus have been reported in Liberia in recent days, President George Weah announced a state of emergency and a lockdown of 4 counties, including Montserrat, where the capital Monrovia is located.
As a further measure under this state of emergency, all Liberians and residents within the borders of Montserrat County, Mangibi County, Nima County, and Grand Cru are to stay at home for the next 14 days beginning at 11:59 p.m. on Friday, March 10, 2020.
The Kenyan government is extending the mandatory quarantine period for hundreds of people who return to the country from abroad for another 14 days. Around 2,000 people were quarantined as they arrived in the country from March 22nd until international flights were banned 3 days later. Mixed with those who had been in contact with patients who tested positive, the quarantined Kenyans and foreigners make up some 80% of the country's coronavirus patients. Health Ministry guidelines initially said that those quarantined would be tested after 5 days, and if their results were negative, they would be sent home to self-isolate, while those who tested positive would be taken to treatment centres. An unknown number were discharged. However, the government ordered a 14-day extension of the quarantine for those who remained in facilities that had registered positive cases last Saturday. As of Wednesday, the country had reported 179 cases and 6 deaths. The number of COVID-19 cases in South Africa has risen steadily over the past few days amid massive community testing in a 21-day national lockdown. The country reported over 1,700 cases and 13 deaths as of Tuesday. Police Minister Beckley Cele has indicated that the lockdown could be extended if the epidemic is not contained. He stressed that the government's first priority is to ensure that the population is safe. Restrictions include no pet walking, no outdoor physical exercise, no beach trips, and a ban on all public gatherings of more than 50 people. Iranian health officials said on Wednesday that the country's total number of COVID-19 cases had risen to over 64,000. Iran is battling the most severe coronavirus outbreak in the Middle East.
Unfortunately, we lost 121 people from those hospitalized in our ICU units over the past 24 hours, and with those 121 people included, 3,993 deaths. Among confirmed cases of this disease have been registered in the country so far. 1,997 new cases of COVID-19 have been registered across the country, and like all recent days, the number of people recovered and discharged from hospitals has been on the rise, reaching 29,812.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.